joining. If you're just tuning in, this is Commercial to Holistic, Gravity Flow and Pressurized Drip Irrigation Systems. And before we, if you're just tuning in, this is Commercial to Holistic. Hold just a second, folks. Sorry about that. And Pressurized Drip Irrigation. I'm getting a bunch of feedback there. Okay, so really grateful to have a really wonderful colleague of mine and long-term employee of IEC, Stephen Bond, providing this presentation. Before we launch into that, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of what Zach shared during the opening introduction during the keynote, before the keynote speaker today, that a survey on COVID impacts is being sent out. And so please take that as part of your participation in our annual conference. And let's see, we'll go ahead and launch into this session. Stephen Bond, his background includes a double BS in biology and environmental chemistry from Southwestern Oklahoma State University, and a Master's of Science in Environmental Science with a watershed resources specialty through the Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering program at Oklahoma State. And he's really our go-to on all things mixed vegetable production and small, medium scale agricultural operations. So we're really appreciative of your time and efforts and expertise that you're lending to us here, Stephen. And also wanted to make sure that we absolutely thank our sponsors of the IAC conference. This session in particular is sponsored by our Champions of Native Agricultural sponsors. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Get that out of the way. Hello everyone. Thank you, Kier. I now I'm a little nervous. No, so I've prepared kind of a cursory look of over a broad array of irrigation techniques in a PowerPoint for us to go over, and we'll take a look at that and leave plenty of time for questions. So pull up the screen. So we titled it Commercial to Holistic, Gravity Flow and Pressurized Drip Irrigation Systems. The drip irrigation systems are incredibly hip these days, and for all good reasons. They allow a producer to have a lot of control, targeted control, or a kind of a systematic or holistic control over a broad area, or targeted control on a plant level. They kind of give us a means to direct a calibrated, pH balanced fertilizer right to a plant or to a system of plants, and all in the name of saving water and increasing efficiency and minimizing the water and feed to the competition. And so, but since this is such a broad audience, I didn't get into any real technical details on the presentation. I've got a lot of examples of irrigation, some of the projects that we've designed with IEC, some things that I do personally, and some images, so a lot of images, including the images or the image in the backdrop of this presentation title page, which is an ice stack, and I believe this one is in India, but they've been popularized this last few years, and I have just forgotten the name of the scientist that kind of come up with this, but he was Indian from India, and they collect the melting glacial water and shoot it up a pipe high in the air, and which is then it gets cold at night and it's cold in the day, and the water freezes in a stack, and they continue to do this until it's no longer freezing, and now they've got a resting stack irrigation water for their highland vegetable production. And this is a was to address a climate change issue that's been felt in otherwise really dry climates in their short growing seasons. So the pretty cool. So I thought I'd put that on the front page. Not necessarily Native American, but I think it could work for some folks in our northern climates and maybe even Alaska. So um, so irrigation technology is something that's not foreign to us. A lot of us utilize irrigation in our modern production, and if one's producing vegetables, they're certainly familiar with irrigation. The best place or the best applications of irrigation come in our driest environments, and the reason that is it gives us more control over the rhizosphere conditions, and allows us to really provide a nurturing habitat for a plant. And that's what irrigation is all about, whether it's flood irrigation or sprinklers, overhead irrigation, or drip irrigation, gravity flowed or pressure delivered. When we utilize irrigation, we're controlling the biological processes, the physiological processes that allow that plant to convert CO2 and water into glucose, and to incorporate all the nutrients into the food that we eat. And when it's dry, you have complete control. So, for instance, I'm in Oklahoma here, and we use irrigation, but we also get a lot of rain in the spring months, and so the way it usually shakes out is we get everything set up, and we're ready to irrigate because we know we're going to have to, but we get a lot of rain, and then the weeds just take over, and you got to kind of reclaim it. And so if y'all have traveled to southern Arizona and California, around Garden City and the Yuma tribal area, Yuma, Arizona, you can see the great benefit of that historic irrigation system that was first developed by the Hohokam. And if you've traveled throughout Arizona, you'll see lots of, and Colorado and parts of California, you'll see the some ruins of some great civilizations that utilized irrigation systems that span across those areas, and they lived in very adverse conditions, and it was through harnessing the powers of the rivers and diverting that water were they able to have such a advances in their civilization. And so I put this up, this image. This is down near, somewhere near the Yuma or Colorado River tribe, and that right off of the Colorado River, where they're utilizing flood irrigation to this day, and it's one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world, due to continued development of the Colorado River canal systems, and flood irrigation of thousands of acres of fruits and vegetables and commodity crops, and they've got it all down there. So there's thousands of acres of pecan trees that are flood irrigated, and corn and citrus and all sorts of plants. So this, if you want to take time to read this, it really just kind of gives them the honor of telling their own story. And they say that there was people there, and there were tribes in Mexico that had come up, that were irrigating maybe before this, and had influenced their culture. And I lived in Arizona for a couple of years, and had visited a lot of those ruins, and it's pretty remarkable to think that they'd how much labor went into all this, and the engineering, really, no, we all know that water flows downhill, but there's some really advanced stuff and how they would carry water around bins with wooden conveyances, and a lot of people are still benefiting from the hard work they did. Yeah, and some of them are tribal, and so it's pretty cool system. And I urge you to, if you're traveling through Arizona, I know a lot of people kind of pass through Flagstaff going down I-40. You could cut down to some really cool ruins around the Sedona Cottonwood area, and kind of get the awe, kind of see what this is all about, or Mesa Verde in Colorado, and really beautiful. So irrigation is site specific. It is engineered. It was engineered then. It is engineered now, and I know that for me it seems really simple, straightforward stuff. You just kind of like connect the dots. We have a water source, and based on that water source, we're going to be able to design a certain size system, and there's a little bit of math that goes into it. So it'd be helpful to have somebody that's good at kind of specking out these designs, but you're really just kind of putting the water to the plant. And there's some really good online resources that are so varied for site specific across the United States. I didn't put a lot of that stuff on here, but let me just say right now that I've always been more than pleased to help some folks and point them in the right direction. And depending on the scale of your irrigation system, you may or may not need an engineer. And if you're utilizing USDA, who do cost shares on irrigation system design and technical assistance, then they'll provide the engineer for you. So that's great news for you tribal leaders, or farm managers that are wanting to go above and beyond to get a nice systematic irrigation system. So we've already mentioned flood irrigation and drip irrigation, and drip irrigation has come a long way, and I've seen some relics of the drip irrigation in Arizona as well on Navajo Nation, and with the Hopi farmers. So drip irrigation hasn't been around for terribly long. So like the 60s and 70s, and it was principally designed and developed in Israel, and had made its way over to what is now modern day. Netafim is your kind of your go-to commercial irrigation line. Their hurricane product line has integrated drip emitters within their tape or their tube, and you can buy it on rolls of 5,000 feet or whatever. So they've got copper sulfated versions, not just Netafim. All the guys and gals that have this out there, all the companies, and they're computer automated. You can bust them out into zones. They've got all kinds of cool things. Overhead impact sprinklers kind of hail from the California area, which is no surprise, where irrigation was really big in the turn of the century. And if y'all are familiar with the gun sprinklers, it's just like a large head that kind of tock 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 goes and shoots large volumes of water. That was the leading design, and if I'm not mistaken, that company become Rainbird, that kind of like really commercialized those. Fertigation is a great benefit of utilizing an overhead flood or drip in theory, but it's mostly akin to and conducive and drip irrigation. So fertigation is where you would have a water supply, be it a well or reservoir, or a city tap even, and as you're running that water to your through your supply line to your vegetables, you're gonna inject fertilizer. And now every one of your dripper heads, which would be part of your design. So when you're designing out a drip irrigation system over an acre, You would have a a width between the lengths of or lines of drip tube or tape, and you can make a selection on how much distance you want between those dripper heads, and everywhere that head is, we can calculate and control the exact flow of water. So if we want to drop 2 gallons per 16 square foot with X number fertilizer. We can do that with fertigation and on a drip irrigation system. Um, so I mentioned USDA is excited to help people increase the efficacy and of their irrigation systems, bringing them into to a more conservative approach, and that's where drip irrigation really is really popular. And just like the center pivots were popular over flood irrigation in the past, now there's been a push for subsurface irrigation for commodity crop production, but they do need 2 out of the last 5 years, and we'll talk about that. One thing that I've recommended for folks to get started on irrigation is to rent a reel irrigator, REEL, and they could use that for irrigation record for 2 years, and then they can get the full assistance. But worry not, NRCS is still pleased to provide technical assistance in the design and development of an irrigation system, and will likely have some cost shares for you, even if you're just starting out. Some things may include a fertigation or the pipe for delivery. It's difficult to get a well set out of NRCS, and that's largely due to the variation in regionality. So, and um, the reason I put this slide in is because this is kind of where I'm always applying the irrigation can be utilized for also for growing grass and developing paddocks, and I've done some subsurface projects where you take a a drip tape and a plow that's pulled. They're called injectors, and so it's a 3-point implement you hitch on the back of your tractor, and you got your reels of drip tape, and you can have however many lines you're going to put down based on your tractor size, and you drop that equipment down into a a trench that you've cut out for your supply line, and you go forward perpendicular to your supply line. And when you get to the end, you snip those drip lines and bend them over and close them off and tie it to your supply. And now you've subset that drip irrigation anywhere from 4 inches to 12 inches below the soil, 14 inches for the really big tractors and big operations. And you are in the rhizosphere. You're kind of like in the you're so you have zero evaporation from the direct flow of the water, and you're mostly going to be dealing with evapotranspiration, which is where the flow of water through the plant's leaves. And so if we can control transpiration, which is kind of what I had alluded to earlier in the talk, then we can drive the physiological processes to optimize the plant growth, and that's what irrigation is all about. But specialty crop production, I know we've got some traditional folks on here that not only grow a little bit, but they also wild harvest. Um, and in some instances, a sugar bush or a berry patch isn't that much different than like a maple orchard, and it may benefit from or a group of blackberries on one's property that may also benefit from irrigation. And so I thought that it'd be nice to kind of broaden our imagination on, oh, what if we irrigated some of the wild stuff in the rough time of the year. So here's kind of some guidance on approaching your local USDA with the idea that some of our wild harvested stuff is actually more managed, and even just by us wild harvesting the crops in some instances, our presence or as Linda Black Elk had mentioned the other day, when we pull the prairie turnip, we do something with the stalk, and that protects it from freeze or helps spread it. And so we're so just our presence there, engaging with the plant, in some instances, in our traditional fashion, is a form of management. And so wild harvested. It's just more of a continuation of that last side. So it's kind of how you frame it within the context of your operations. And I know California's done some really exciting things with traditional ecological knowledge and managing of their acorn bearing oaks that they use for flour, and there's several other examples throughout, but I could see this being very applicable in a lot of wild harvest scenarios. um, so Site specific and regional, and that's very important when we're engineering a irrigation system. The one 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 project that I helped on was in Eagle Butte, South Dakota, and I was surprised that the code, the state code for water delivery, supply lines, says that the pipes have to be 8 foot below the ground. And that's radically different from Oklahoma, where 8 inches below the ground would usually suffice. But our codes 12 to 14, depending on where you're at. And our drip line itself is just blown out at the end of the year with a commercial air compressor, and all is well. And so it just working throughout the U.S. has really shown me a lot of different working conditions, different environments. The soil type is a major determination for the width between rows, and the distance between emitters, like I mentioned earlier. So if you have a really loose sandy soil, you're going to have more drip emitters in a more concentrated area. If you're working in most of the Great Plains and Southern Plains, you're going to have some pretty sticky clay-based soils, and you're going to have a larger distance between the rows and between the emitters, and you can change the flow rate of those by buying the right products. So don't just jump out there and buy some drip line, because the drip line you select is will largely dictate your control over the water flow. Anytime we're talking about large scale, I know we call small scale commercial production small scale, but that still could mean 10,000 pounds of produce per acre if you're doing a commercial vegetable operation, and some operations get closer to 15 to 20,000 pounds per acre, and that's a lot of produce to pull off all at once. So you got to be ready for it. So I've worked with a lot of folks that have scaled up, going from an acre or so to 20 to 30 acres, or even larger, and we find a secondary processor and kind of work through um, the um, what we're going to do with all this produce once we've so successfully grown it with irrigation. So I just thought I'd put a plug in there for that. So here's a very simple system at my home site. I have a little subsistence place there that I grow produce from year to year, and you'll see in the bottom right hand corner. I never use the I saw someone using the The spotlight is maybe that's what it is. Oh no, we're not gonna. All right, well, I'll just use my cursor. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see an irrigation box, and that has one valve that opens and closes based on a command from a little computer, which is just a timer box. And so it's very much like one would have in for their lawn sprinkler systems. And the water is piped through the PVC, and which is perpendicular to these beds. And the as we can see here, here's our little valve in the box, and I usually put a water font on here, and so I can hook up a water hose in that box if I need it. And I've brought the PVC out of the ground. You can see where I hook up a very simple fertigation system. And I really like the system. I kind of started setting this stuff up so I could do some demonstration and some simple trainings at my own place, because there's not a lot of sites in Oklahoma where we can take folks and show them something physically working. And the fertigation system in this instance is, I just set a 5 gallon bucket, and I wish that was in the image, but there'd be a little tube running from a valve that goes into the bucket. And when I turn the irrigation onto these beds, it uses a Venturi pump principle, and sucks a metered volume of a nutrient solution out of the 5 gallon bucket, which would be sitting next to the irrigation box, and flows that directly to the plants. And so it's a real simple system that I'd be pleased to help anyone kind of, buy on Amazon or kind of spec out very simply. You can see this was a former IEC intern, Matt, from Stratford, Oklahoma, who's dragging the drip line, and I believe this is point 0.6 gallons per minute, and they're probably set at every 22, 24 inches. And so if we go down that brown line, imagine every 2 foot there's a drip emitter, and then on the opposite side, I always run a double run on these style beds. I counter set the drip emitters, and so really I'm creating a blanket of water because I want kind of a uniform distribution on these beds, because the roots don't just grow straight below the plant. And that's what's worked best in my designs. And then they're just dead ended at the end of the row. So um, here's a system that at another place where I operate, and at the ranch, and this is an acre of plasticulture that we're putting in. And I really love this photo because you can see we're using a tiny little tractor, this is in a remote place off in a canyon lands. So it's about all the cultivation that we can do down there. So this little tractor worked perfect. And if you could see in the image next to Holly here, there's a roll of drip tape, and we're doing a double drip tape underneath that plasticulture. And so I shared this image because I want people to know how accessible this is. The plasticultures come a long way, along with fertigation and drip irrigation, and can be installed using some pretty small equipment. This is a Beaver Sato tractor, but they Sato become Mitsubishi, and I see these things on Craigslist all over the country. And I've helped people source old tractors. If we're working a vegetable operation, the old tractors are often seen in vegetable operations, not because they're inexpensive, because they're kind of a pain in the neck to work on when something goes awry, but because they had large wheels and you could set the width of the tires. So the large, by large I mean tall and narrow wheels, and they have a creeper gear, or an extremely low. So they'll have a low, medium, high, and then a 1, 2, 3 and reverse. and you need that really low gear to set things like plasticulture and to really get your drip irrigation put in line. And later, when if you're going to run a harvester or a transplanter behind you, you want to be able to go really slow so folks that are setting on the transplanter can stick the transplants in the ground. And there's a lot of reasons we use these old tractors. And so this is that site in Eagle Butte, South Dakota, and you can see we've got the beds set and our supply lines are laid out, and we're about to trench them in. And here's the trencher for that project. So this is our delivery lines off of the main supply lines that are 8 foot in the ground that run down the center of this bed system. And it wasn't a very good image. It's just a big massive pile of soil. So when you're doing your supply line for all of your irrigation, um, historically or classically, I should say, we use PVC. I've since switched to PEX, and PEX is a lot more efficient of a system and has better unions and can handle freezing a little bit. But here's a site in Oklahoma where we're tying in I think this was a 5-acre irrigation system for a Chickasaw veteran. He was older and just couldn't crawl around in the ground and tie all this stuff in, but they had a lot of promise for vegetable operation, and so I helped them develop their operation out, and was pleased to do that. And here's at Bird Creek where we had a much larger install and had to break out the big equipment. But these are also commonly used for the subsurface irrigation setup. So where you're going to have a long rectangle of irrigated area, and you're going to cut perpendicular, so you can drop your supply line, which is going to feed the drip tape. And so this is um, an area that hopefully we'll be working this coming year. This is at Pawnee, and the one of our former colleagues has went back to work for her own tribe, and is now in charge of or has a hand in the agricultural system, and so I'd love to put a drip system out for Pawnee this year. So talking about water flow and whether or not we're going to have sprinklers or drip irrigation systems, or is it going to be flood irrigation is kind of jumping the gun if we don't have any water. So I've got a couple of images of water detention, capturing water for subsequent use or diversion. This can either be stormwater, so like for instance in Oklahoma, we get a lot of rain in the spring months, and we could capture some of that water on site and use some solar systems to pump it out, or a more aggressive electric pump or diesel pump. Diverting streams or rivers is very common, and there's a whole myriad of storage solutions that we've got. And this is no um, this is something that we've been doing for thousands of years, and this is a great image of Hopi, um, uh, probably outside of Moenkopi, and utilizing water from a stream, and they had dug this holding pond off from the stream, and they're literally utilizing this to ladle water um, to their plants. And I've seen that folks are still doing that in Hopi, um, which is really cool. If you've ever visited Moenkopi and Kokosmovi and Oldarobi around there, you can see now in Tuba City does have some coveted or some conveyances for flow off of the lake that sets right off from Tuba City, and they're doing some flood irrigation and some of those farms. And um, it's Rose Dan or Dan Rose Farm there in Tuba City does a great job at growing their traditional produce with the flood irrigated land, as do several people in Arizona. You know, the Tohoto O'odham and Crit does a lot of commodity production and the Salt River Pima and have citrus and pecans and commodity. But anyways, back to detention. I just thought this is a great image. So here's a modern variation, and this is something that I'm really wanting to put in for my own production in Stratford, because we do get such a large flow of water in the spring months, and I'd like to capture that. And as we all know, it may not be always the case that we get a lot of spring rain. So we have drought really often in Oklahoma, and this is a solution I've been looking at. So these are stackable um, uh, spacers, and the idea is you have a geotextile fabric that you've put in a hole, a rectangle that you've dug, and usually you're going to bring an engineer on something like this because you got to be a certain height above groundwater. And but the concept here is you have the geotextile and these spacers, and then after you get your spacers laid out, you put geotextile on the top, and now you can put soil back over it, and you've not taken up any of your precious farm space. And I've got a little small operation. What's more common is to use a holding pond. And one project I worked with in Arizona for Tohoto O'odham, we had a producer. He was one of the first Tohoto O'odham to ever get a farm loan, and he had bought a commercial John Deere tractor and put in an alfalfa production way out in the desert, right off the Mexico border. And NRCS had helped them drop a well and help them design everything. And he couldn't afford the diesel to run the well to irrigate the alfalfa, and so he was producing spending $800 an acre to produce $500 an acre worth of um, worth of alfalfa. And so we brought in rural development and utilized the Rural Energy Incentive Program within RCS and got these guys tied together. And they set up a dirt pond, is what they call it, but a holding tank uphill. And we put a inline solar pump, whereas the diesel would prime the well because it was a large commercial well, like an 8-inch pipe. So the diesel would prime the well and get everything going, and then the solar would take over, and they would pump over to this holding pond, which was at a higher elevation, which was then gravity fed down and flood irrigated their alfalfa. Really cool project. It was a huge project. Here's a geotextile pond that's in the ground. Just a, it's a hole in the ground that you put water in. So this could be applicable in a lot of places. Usually these will be kind of rose up off the ground, where you have like a dam that surrounds all four sides, and to protect them from storm water. Here's another solution that may be more applicable for some of us in remote areas, or places where you have a lot of rock substrate, and or don't have the equipment to dig and to geotextile a pond. Or maybe you just like to look at this big bladder because I think it's kind of cool. And there's some benefit from these too, because now you have a pressurized system um, that is protected for food safety, irrigation water. So pretty cool system. And these you can get at almost any size, as big as delivered off of a semi, or small bladders that are a few hundred gallons through Amazon. Here's another method, another form of water delivery, detention at the same time. You've got a spring box is what we're looking at here, and so usually there'll be elevation where there's a natural spring, and you're gonna dig down where that's coming up, and you'll one can easily find some really nice extension documents on spring boxes online for so I would go to your local university extension sites and kind of pull up what they're doing there, because every one of these are a little different, but this is a real fancy one I like, and it's something I share with friends, and and you can they can get as fancy as you'd like. And this is also something we have been doing for thousands of years, and some variation of it. And I've personally set in several springs that had a built-in area up in Colorado, or in South Texas at Big Bend, or in Arizona where it was originally a native structure, and folks had come in and put some cemented rock around it, and to really capture a nice place to relax. But it was probably originally utilized for irrigation. So irrigation delivery, we got options. We've already kind of went over a lot of these: impact sprinklers, the water guns, drip irrigation, water reels, flood irrigation via canals or via pipe. In Durango, I was with a friend of mine, and he I was on vacation. He's like, well, I got to go to work and irrigate all this alfalfa. And he worked for a horse operator. And I was like, well, I'd like to come with you. And he's like, it's going to be a lot of work, but I wanted to see what it was all about. I'd never seen this style, and I've got an image in here. It was we basically we had the canal coming through off of the Canejos River, if I'm not mistaken. Is it Canejos? Well, anyways, off of the river outside of Durango. It's not Canejos. I'm forgetting the name of it. I think it starts with an A. And we would divert that water into our PVC pipe, and we had a system of PVC pipe. We would move uphill at an angle, and the water would flow out of the pipe downhill. And it has these little windows you can raise and lower. Pretty cool. And so we'll get to that image soon enough. This is what we mostly think about when we see irrigation: is the center pivots. Um, they're hugely popular and still going. This one has been retrofitted for the micro irrigation, um, which is kind of a modern standard for the center pivot. And you're going to see these all across the bread basket. The Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Iowa, where large volumes of land are being irrigated for commodity production. They're also used in Arizona and California, and just about anywhere where you have commercial water. And I guess right now would be as good a time as any to differentiate. Not everybody can do this. You got to have the water. So just because you drop a well doesn't mean you're going to get this kind of water. So you're going to be working with like on a home site, you're going to be in the as low as the 20 gallons per minute, as high as the 80 gallons per minute scale. And that's kind of what you're going to find across the country for wells. Now, if you're in an irrigation district, that means you're over an aquifer that can produce somewhere around, a commercial irrigation district is going to produce somewhere around 300 gallons per minute. And that's a big well. That's a big pipe in the ground, and you're going to use a lot of diesel to get it out. And so there's that, and that's kind of what it takes to drive one of these things, because they're water driven. Here's kind of a smaller, older variation, the precursors for the center pivots. And I see these when I cut through New Mexico and not so much Arizona, but Utah. See a lot of them in Utah and Colorado. There are some throughout Oklahoma, and I see them in Kansas and Nebraska and other places. I don't cut across Nebraska and Kansas all that often, but and a lot of these have kind of been, they've gone the way of the dodo, and they've been replaced with the larger commercial systems. But this is so here's a water gun, and this is something that these water guns can irrigate around an acre at a time. So, you're going to have a supply line. It may even be like a 1.5 or 2 inch hose, because these are large systems, and you're going to need a good delivery of water. But they spread it over a big area, and they're very common in South America because they're really inexpensive. But they are available here in the States and throughout. Here's the water reel, which is basically the same thing. It's a water gun, only you're going to run this line out. So you got your supply line linked up on that reel, and as the water goes, it pulls that line. So now you can do a wider area, which could be a long rectangle. And if you don't have irrigation history, and you're set up and you're doing your schedule Fs and you're ready to go, then you can lease one of these things for a write-off for 2 years and get your irrigation record. Maybe then you're going to go to subsurface and you're going to have NRCS help with the cost share on that. Here's that PVC system. You can see the windows and the water coming out, so you can close like every other one, and kind of adjust the angle and flow, and depending on, so it's like a irrigation operator kind of. This is kind of like a very manual way to do it. And I remember we were knees up and muck boots and just trudging around that horse pasture, and it wasn't very exciting. I don't know that I'd ever wish that upon anyone, but still pretty cool system. So the modern day irrigation systems are highly advanced, and we've got Bluetooth and means to digitally relay information, and their expense has come down significantly. So in a large cornfield, as you're driving through Kansas, you may just think, oh, those goofy farmers are just squirting water on the ground, but they're not. They have soil sensors and they're tied into the evapotranspiration rate, which dictate the flow of water and when to fertilize, and all kinds of data that can drive your irrigation application. And here's kind of a very simplified um, conceptual map of that. And you can see the central computer, which could be as simple as like a timer. And they get real sophisticated fast, where they incorporate precipitation, evapotranspiration, all that stuff too. But you've got your pump controls, so that's gonna be turning on the pump according to the timer, and then that's going to go out to your valve, which is going to, this is kind of set up on a zone. So everywhere you see a radio valve and sensor, that's a zone. And so you can control, if you're growing sweet corn next to potatoes, you're going to be putting a lot more water on your sweet corn than your potatoes. So you can run that system for 45 minutes, and your potatoes may only need 20 minutes, or and you may even have an entirely different drip line connected to the whole system. So pretty cool. Here's a really good, just a real good image for your standard subsurface irrigation, or conventional drip irrigation system. And I think the most important thing in this whole photo is the sand filter, or some kind of filtration, screen filters. You're going to have a series of filters, because you don't want to get little particles of sand into your drip emitters. So don't be afraid of the math. There's a lot of models out there, and there's some crazy kooky guys that would be pleased to help you work up a system. And that's, I guess we can go to questions. We got a little bit of time left.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Stephen. And yeah, we'll go ahead and open this up for questions. Feel free to utilize the live Q&A button through your conference platform there. I guess well, people might be submitting a question. What would you recommend, Stephen, in terms of the, I guess the, for you mentioned it earlier on, but just folks that are focusing on like traditional plant restoration and some of the approaches to irrigation, and maybe even some of the resources that you might have touched on, but can you come back around to that? Because I know that I get hit up about that a lot out here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sprinkler systems are probably going to be most applicable with that. But maybe we have one of those bladders sitting next to our favorite Prunus angustifolia or Chickasaw plums, and we noticed that on dry years we don't get plums, so we're going to set up a bladder and run a simple sprinkler system, or I hate to even mention them, but y'all know at the garden centers they've got that soaker hose. That would be a way to really run out a bladder and to water something. The it, you can get crazy with it, creative with it. You can run a little solar pump and run an actual sprinkler or a drip line around your favorite trees or herbs. If you're doing wall harvest, these things are usually in batches and patches. So that would be one direct way to do that. But this could also be applicable. The One of the reasons I included those slides is because if you have let's say we have some acreage, and we're going to put some plants out for later harvest, like we're going to be kind of doing some remediation with native plants. They would benefit from some irrigation. And so if you're in really remote areas where you're trying to repopulate an area, you can have one of these bladders just sitting out there, that is on a timer with a solar system, and you're gonna really nurture those plants till they can take care of themselves, and then you can move the bladder onto other sites. So I could see this having some real applicability for restoration work, and I know a lot of your folks out in California could, that's what I'd kind of recommend for them.
Great.
But
We got a few more questions rolling in now. Let's see. So we're installing a well and would like to use drip system to water our traditional plants. This came in as we're talking about it, to be grown in a high tunnel or greenhouse on approximately 5 acres. How much gallons per minute is required? What kind of pipes are required?
Well, it's a good question. And that's where um, I need to know the flow rate of the well and what's your capacity of the well. And so NRCS can help them determine that. If they could also look at determining flow rate of a well. So essentially, you turn the well on and you calculate how much water runs over a amount of time, how many gallons you get over the course of a minute, and you can punch that into your equations. Your supply line can be PVC because it's real accessible. And then when it comes to delivery, there's two ways of thinking about it. NRCS design system is usually going to be geared towards irrigating everything all at once. And so you turn it on for 20 minutes, and the whole acreage is irrigated. There's some novel ways where we can break up an area. So if we have an area that's 100% of an area, we can break it up into 20%. So, or let's say 10 acres, we can break it up into 2-acre plots with a valve. And that little computer is going to tell valve 1 to come on, and then we only have to supply the flow to meet that small subset. And then when that one shuts off, it tells the next valve 2 to run. And so we may not have a well that can pump 10 acres all at once, but we might be able to irrigate 2 acres. And so hopefully that kind of answers that question. But feel free to, my email is steven@indianag.org, and we can take a look at, I can make some recommendations there, and we can take a look at that. Just, put it in the title that maybe irrigation talk, so I recognize it.
Yeah, so yeah, questions are continuing to come in. A question came up, kind of a succinct statement. What about pumpkin bladder tanks? Do you have any
Pumpkin.
familiarity? Pumpkin bladder tank.
It just may be talking about, there's a lot of different types of bladders. So some of the bladders look a lot like a swimming pool, where you have kind of a hardened sides, or supported sides. I'm guessing that's what they're talking about, unless they may actually be talking about using a large pumpkin as a bladder, which I think is cool. I've seen the pumpkin racing, like in the Great Lakes region. They like put motors on these carved out pumpkins, so why not large pumpkin bladder? But maybe they're kind of talking about the different types of bladders. There's a lot of different styles, and so I think they have a lot of applicability for especially these remote areas.
Sure. So this is a question that between you and I, we could both probably answer it. Will the PowerPoint presentation be shared to the participants? And that's yeah, holistically speaking, everything will be available to participants of every session,
Hmm.
and becomes available within an hour after the presentation. So just check back onto this particular um, workshop slot, and it'll be right there. Quick question on I guess just generally speaking, what drip irrigation system do you recommend? Like they're wanting specifics around companies to look into.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, I almost ubiquitously use Netafim products, and they're kind of difficult to find a distributor. It's become increasingly popular, but Netafim has a good product. I've used Rainbird in the past. John Deere has their own. There's a lot of different outfits. So if you can find here in Oklahoma, we use American Plant, and I'll source through them. But if I'm buying things online, I go to berryhill.com, and they've got all the Netafim stuff, and those guys are real knowledgeable, and they would be pleased to sell you whatever you can afford to buy. So they'll help with some of the design too. Netafim, Hurricane Line. The specifics on flow and width of rows and all that stuff is kind of relative to your soil conditions. And so, like I said, if you're in clay, you're going to be choosing something different than if you're in pure sand. And there's all kinds of variations in the middle, and that stuff's important. And so, he's gonna, the folks at Berryhill or whoever are gonna ask you, what kind of soil do you have? So you may want to send that soil off to a soil forage analytical lab, um, so you can get that answer for them, because that is important. And the kind of crop you're growing is important too. So you kind of got to make a decision on what you're growing. If you're going to go kind of middle of the road, what I found that works in both clay and soil and sandy loam and sand is kind of a point 0.6, like every 24 inches, and then you can stagger them, and now you're kind of dispersing water over a broader area, because the water comes down and it plumes out. And so you don't, if the water's got a real high infiltration rate, it's going to go below the rhizosphere and plume. And so the way we deal with that is we put more water at the top so it plumes. Now, if you got real, real dense clay soil, you want it to drip real slow, and you're gonna put a smaller volume of water over a longer amount of time and let it plume. Because if you just do this, it'll just inundate. You'll have standing water. So that all that stuff's important. But Berry Hill could is a go-to, and you can order online, and they're on their website.
Next one, excuse me, we're planning to implement a drip system. And this is a question regarding clogging, being an
Mhm.
issue. And is that a common concern? And you talked a little bit about that. What do you recommend to prevent clogging? So I guess, yeah, you touched on that a bit in your presentation, but maybe a little bit more specifics for this question here.
Yeah, yeah. So I commonly see like sand filters that you would use for a swimming pool, utilized for both greenhouse and field production. The a sand filter has so it's full of sand. It's full of really small particle sand, and it runs your water through the sand filter, and you have a little clarity side tank where you can see, if you watch some YouTube videos on sand filters, those are really a cheap way to filtrate a large area. So a sand filter may be my first filtration system. I'll do like a triple filtration system on it depends on the design and the quality of your water. And so you could send your water off to a lab to get analyzed for particle size if you want to know the exact number. But sand filters, disc filters, and then basket filters. And so the sand filter was going to get most of your big stuff off. Your disc filter is going to be right at the edge, and maybe a disc filter is enough, but you can also put a filter on all your valves. So your valve would have an integrated filter, and I do that because you're blowing your sand filter out every couple of weeks for posterity, because it keeps your flow up. Your disc filter, you rinse them out with a 5-gallon bucket. They're really easy to do. And there's far more sophisticated filtration systems out there. This is just kind of within reach, and this is what most people are using. It's very conventional for 1 to 20 acre vegetable operations.
Great. All righty. Well, I think that's all the questions. Yep, we went through them all. And yeah, Stephen, your expertise is so appreciated. Everything you bring forward here is just really applicable, I think, to a lot of people that are exploring drip irrigation and kind of trying to toe dip into new territory. And yeah, it's definitely exemplified by folks, wanting that your presentation afterwards and stuff. And so, thank you again so much for your time, and thank you to all the participants who got on, and we really do hope that you engage with all of us after the conference as well. Utilize this as a starting point if you haven't had much engagement with IEC. And Stephen mentioned Stephen, STEVEN at indianag.org. Directly get to him. And yeah, we're just so appreciative. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Ćpi slačo.